So today, we continue our deep exploration of secret societies, and specifically, we are going to focus our attention on their most powerful and perhaps most terrifying secret weapon, mind control. We are talking about the ability to fundamentally turn a human being into a programmable robot that can be used as an instrument of power. Now, I know that sounds extreme to many of you. It sounds like science fiction or a conspiracy theory, but what I'm going to show you today is that this technology has existed for thousands of years, and the techniques that were developed in ancient Egypt are still being used today. The methods have been refined and modernized, of course, but the fundamental principles remain exactly the same. Before we dive into this dark subject, I want to review what we discussed last time because this is a class built on interconnected ideas. If you don't understand the foundation, you won't understand what we're building today. Last time, we discussed the transformation of the religious worldview during the course of Western history. We traced the progression from the mother goddess civilization to polytheism, and finally to monotheism. We saw that during this transition, the way our minds perceive the world radically changed in three fundamental ways. The first change was in how we understand the relationship between mind and matter. In the ancient world, people understood that mind leads to matter. The universe was conceived as one giant mind that vibrates, creating atoms and physical matter. But today, in your modern science classes, you are taught the exact opposite. You are taught that matter leads to mind, that the brain creates consciousness. As you will discover throughout this course, this modern conception is deeply problematic and creates contradictions that materialist science simply cannot resolve. The second big change was in how we interpret experience. In the ancient world, people understood reality metaphorically. They saw that the world was controlled by invisible forces they called gods. Today, everything is literal. You are taught that if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. The third great change was in how we relate to our own intuition. Ancients trusted their direct experience. Today, you are taught to trust data and experts over your own perception. This is why school feels so difficult. You are being trained to override your natural understanding in favor of authority. This is the foundation of social control. Now, I want to talk about mind control in its historical context. Let's go back to the earliest mass civilizations: China, the Indus Valley, Mesopotamia, and Egypt. Of these four, Egypt was the most powerful for thousands of years, and the techniques they developed for maintaining power were extraordinarily sophisticated. When you have a mass society, your biggest problem is always social control. How do you get millions of people to cooperate? China developed bureaucracy through the Imperial Civil Service examination, channeling competitive energy into a test, a system that survives today as the Gaokao. The Indus Valley developed a religion of egalitarianism and peace. Mesopotamia, lacking natural defenses, used constant war as an organizing principle. But Egypt's solution was the pharaoh. They believed the pharaoh was literally God incarnate. Obedience to him was obedience to the divine order. However, this system had a problem. The pharaoh was actually a human being, and his life was always at risk. This brings us to the nature of leadership. In school, you are taught that leaders need wisdom, empathy, and vision. But in the real world of power, historical leaders need exactly three characteristics: unpredictability, high stress tolerance, and a lack of empathy. Look at leaders like Putin, Trump, or Xi. They share these traits. First, unpredictability. People cannot predict how they will behave. Second, high stress tolerance. Trump is despised by half of America, yet he sleeps like a baby and thrives on the conflict. Third, a lack of empathy. He does not emotionally register the suffering of others, allowing him to make ruthless decisions. We can describe all three of these qualities with a single word: dissociation. Dissociation means your mind separates from your experience. You become an observer in a movie of your own life. This split between the experiencing self and the observing self produces unpredictability because there is no single consistent self. It produces stress tolerance because you aren't feeling the stress. And it produces a lack of empathy because others' pain doesn't feel real. Another term for extreme dissociation is multiple personality disorder. Leaders like Trump display unpredictability because they are literally different people in different contexts. This matters for power competition and game theory. As we have discussed, the secret to winning a massive game is cheating through secret alliances. But to win against other alliances, you must be the intersection point of multiple groups. You need to be loyal to conflicting groups simultaneously. The only way to do this without being detected is to have multiple personalities, each with its own authentic loyalties. Spies are recruited for this exact capacity for dissociation, the ability to be anyone the situation requires. Now, let's go back to Egypt. The pharaoh is born into power. not chosen. To survive, he needs these ruthless characteristics. The Egyptian priests faced a question. Can you take a person born into a position and deliberately manufacture dissociation? The answer is yes. That is what the Egyptian mystery traditions were designed to do. I must emphasize that this is speculation based on reconstructing the logic of Egyptian mythology. Egyptian myths are disjointed and don't flow like normal stories unless you view them as scripts to be acted out ritually. The pharaoh was identified with three divine figures: Ra, the sun god; Osiris, the god of civilization; and Horus, the god of kingship. In Egyptian theology, the pharaoh was literally a reincarnation of all three. Through ritual enactment, the priests created memories of being each of these gods, effectively creating three distinct personalities. First is Ra, the sun god. Every night, he descends into the underworld to fight the serpent Apophis. If he fails, the world ends. He kills Apophis by stabbing, burning, or strangling, and the sun rises. Ra represents the virtuous hero who protects the world through righteous violence. Imagine this as a ritual. The young prince, drugged with psychedelics, is dressed as Ra and forced to kill an enemy, perhaps a prisoner. He experiences himself as the divine warrior. Second is Osiris, the wise ruler betrayed by his brother Set. Set tricks Osiris into a coffin, throws him in the Nile, and later cuts him into pieces scattered across the world. Osiris's wife, Isis, finds the pieces, reassembles him, and has sex with the reassembled body to conceive a child. Osiris represents the passive victim who endures dismemberment and death, saved only by love. As a ritual, the prince is confined in a coffin, buried alive, symbolically cut or marked, and then saved and comforted by a priestess acting as Isis. Third is Horus, the avenging sun. He fights Set in a series of disturbing contests involving drowning matches as hippos and sexual domination. Eventually, Horus triumphs. He represents the vengeful child who survives abuse to reclaim his power. In the ritual, the prince experiences near drowning and sexual violation, transforming from victim to victor. These aren't just stories. They are scripts for creating multiple personalities through trauma. Extreme trauma causes dissociation. The mind splits to survive. The priests use this to create specific identities. Ra, the killer; Osiris, the victim; Horus, the avenger; and through it all, there is Isis, the handler. A priestess or priest wearing the mask of Isis becomes the pharaoh's only source of safety during the trauma. He becomes dependent on her. Later, the priests can control the pharaoh by appearing as Isis, the one figure he trusts absolutely. Furthermore, they used smell as a trigger. Specific scents present during the rituals would be released in the throne room to activate specific identities. If they needed a warrior, they released the scent of Ra. If they needed a passive figure, the scent of Osiris. We are all like this to some degree. We have different identities for different contexts: school, home, work. The pharaoh was just an extreme, deliberate version. Trauma-based programming creates hard identities that can be triggered independently. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine you are the world's best soccer player. One day, you lose your memory. You forget who you are and that you play soccer. For 10 years, you wander as an amnesiac. Then you step onto a field and someone kicks a ball at you. You kick it back perfectly. You are still the best player because the skill isn't in your conscious memory. It is in your body and nervous system. It is automatic. Trauma-based programming works the same way. The responses are stored in the body. When a trigger is pulled, the person responds automatically, without conscious thought. The implications are profound. If you understand these techniques, you can turn any human into a programmable instrument. You can create a killer, a sex slave, or a compliant servant who follows orders without question. The Egyptians figured this out 5,000 years ago. Why would the pharaoh submit to this? Because the trauma, combined with drugs and near-death experiences, NDEs, provided access to the spiritual realm. NDEs, tunnels of light, life reviews, feelings of peace, are common in people who nearly die. The priests discovered they could induce these states. The programming was the price of admission to transcendence. The priests experimented on themselves first, seeking spiritual truth, and discovered that the techniques that broke the mind also opened it to the divine and made it programmable. We have not improved on the Egyptians. Our modern technology uses the same basic techniques: drowning, confinement, sexual violation, sensory deprivation, and drugs. The fundamentals haven't changed because human biology hasn't changed. I want to show you evidence that these techniques are in use today. After September 11, 2001, the U.S. began capturing suspected terrorists. In 2004, photos leaked from Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq showing prisoners hooded, stacked in pyramids, and sexually humiliated. The official story was rogue soldiers, but we learned that two psychologists were paid $80 million by the CIA to develop enhanced interrogation techniques based on the theory of learned helplessness, breaking a person's resistance through inescapable suffering. This is the Osiris ritual, turning a fighter into a passive victim. But did it fail? The program produced ISIS. The Islamic State, is the name a coincidence? ISIS is the goddess who reassembles the broken victim and gives birth to the avenger. Many ISIS fighters were radicalized in these American-run prisons. We have testimony from prisoners like Abu Zubaydah, who described being put in coffins, drowned, waterboarded, and sexually humiliated. These are the specific scripts of Osiris and Horus. They weren't just extracting information, they were breaking down identities and building new ones. ISIS fighters act like programmed robots, carrying out suicide attacks and atrocities on command. The chaos in the Middle East continues because the goal isn't peace. The goal is controlled chaos using programmed human drones. This aligns with the history of MKUltra. In the 1950s, the CIA program led by Sidney Gottlieb experimented with LSD, hypnosis, and trauma to control human minds. They destroyed the documents, but we know they succeeded in finding ways to break people. The official story is that MKUltra failed and ended. But if it failed, why destroy the evidence? And why do the same techniques appear in modern prisons? The evidence suggests the program succeeded and went underground, evolving into modern interrogation and conditioning systems. Look at modern society. Social media, pharmaceuticals, mass education, and entertainment are all systems of conditioning. Social media uses intermittent reinforcement to train you like an animal. Psychiatric drugs are based on theories from MKUltra research. Schools condition children to obey authority and stop questioning. Entertainment, literally called programming, shapes your narrative of reality. In Egypt, only the pharaoh was programmed. Today, everyone is the pharaoh. The techniques of control have been democratized. You are not a free individual. You are responding to triggers implanted without your consent. I want to mention something about psychology. It is strange that psychologists often have higher rates of mental illness than the general population. And rarely do people get cured by psychology. They are managed. They remain in therapy for decades. Perhaps the goal isn't healing, which creates free people, but management, which keeps people functional for the economy. Someone might ask, if social media is a tool of control, why is it private? Who built the internet? The US military. They built the infrastructure. Private companies like Facebook or TikTok are essentially franchises allowed to operate on this military infrastructure because they serve the larger system of intelligence and control. I need to emphasize, this is a class about speculation. I don't have the classified files. I am connecting dots based on patterns. Take everything I say with skepticism. That is the point, to train you to question official narratives. But I am confident that while the forms change, the dynamics of power remain stable. The people running things are heirs to an ancient tradition of social control. So, where does this leave you? First, knowing is valuable. You can see the cage. Second, pay attention to your reactions. When you are triggered, ask why. Third, be skeptical of official stories. Realize that sources of information have agendas. Fourth, seek out authentic experiences, nature, genuine connection, that weren't programmed into you. You cannot unprogram yourself by will alone, but you can create a gap between stimulus and response. The techniques I have described are morally horrific, but understanding them is necessary. We will continue to look at how mass media and education function as programming systems. For now, remember the Egyptian archetypes: Ra the hero, Osiris the victim, Horus the Avenger, and Isis the Controller. Remember the fundamental insight: human minds are programmable. The question is always, who is doing the programming and for what purpose? I will see you in the next class.